On September 10, 2025, Canada sent shockwaves across North America by abruptly closing its land border to all non-essential American transit to Alaska. The announcement came without warning, leaving millions glued to their screens as breaking news alerts flashed across televisions and phones. The move, delivered by the Minister of Public Safety in an emergency press conference, instantly severed the main land link between the lower 48 states and Alaska. The closure was so sudden that travelers, businesses, and U.S. officials alike were caught completely off guard, scrambling to understand the implications. Americans en route to Alaska found themselves stranded at border crossings, their plans upended in an instant. Confusion and uncertainty reigned as families, tourists, and workers tried to figure out their next steps, many of them stuck in limbo with nowhere to go. Canadian officials defended the closure as a necessary response to repeated violations of quarantine and transit rules by U.S. travelers. Reports had surfaced of Americans making unauthorized stops, ignoring direct routes, and putting Canadian communities at risk, prompting the government to act decisively in the name of public health. The impact was immediate and widespread. Military families relocating to new bases, long-haul truckers transporting essential goods, and seasonal workers heading north for employment, all were suddenly cut off, their journeys halted at the border with little information about when or if they could proceed. As word spread, stories emerged of Americans being denied service at gas stations, restaurants, and motels in Canadian border towns. What began as a bureaucratic issue quickly escalated into a personal and diplomatic crisis, with tensions rising on both sides of the border. The White House wasted no time in responding, expressing outrage and framing the closure as a targeted affront to American citizens. U.S. political leaders demanded answers, and the stage was set for a major international dispute that threatened to overshadow years of close cooperation. The effects rippled quickly through supply chains, logistics companies halted shipments, and alarms were raised about potential shortages of food, fuel, and medical supplies in Alaska. The closure exposed just how dependent the state was on the land route through Canada for its essential goods. For many, the closure was more than just an inconvenience. It was a direct challenge to the free movement of U.S. citizens and commerce between two parts of their own country. The blocked route forced families and businesses to confront the reality of their isolation. This fundamental issue of access and sovereignty quickly became the central point of contention. What started as a public health decision had now turned into a flashpoint of international tension, with both governments under pressure to find a solution. The fallout dominated headlines for days, sparking heated debates and testing the resilience of U.S.-Canada relations. As diplomats met behind closed doors, the world watched to see how two of the world's closest allies would navigate this unprecedented crisis. The Alaska Highway is more than just a stretch of pavement. It's Alaska's vital land link to the rest of the United States, a lifeline that threads through some of the most remote and breathtaking landscapes in North America. This legendary road is not only a feat of engineering but also a symbol of resilience and connection. Stretching over 1,300 miles, the highway begins in Dawson Creek, British Columbia, and winds its way through the Yukon before finally reaching Delta Junction, Alaska. Along the way, it passes through dense forests, rugged mountains, and vast stretches of wilderness, connecting dozens of small communities. Built at breakneck speed during World War II, the Alaska Highway was a strategic military project, constructed by thousands of workers and soldiers in just 8 months. For over 80 years, it's been the backbone for moving people, supplies, and dreams northward. Today, most of Alaska's consumer goods, construction materials, and food arrive via trucks on this route. Every day, convoys of vehicles deliver everything from fresh produce to building supplies, keeping Alaskan communities stocked and connected to the outside world. Any disruption to this critical artery threatens immediate shortages and price hikes, leaving store shelves empty and families anxious about their next meal or essential supplies. The highway is also a major tourism engine, drawing thousands of adventurers, road trippers, and RV travelers every summer. It supports businesses in both Alaska and Canadian towns along the way, from cozy motels to quirky roadside attractions. For military families, explorers, and those seeking the ultimate road trip, it's an iconic journey, one that represents freedom, adventure, and a deep sense of national unity between the U.S. and Canada. When the border closed, it severed not just a physical route, but also a psychological connection to the American frontier. The sense of isolation was immediate and profound, affecting both sides of the border. Canadian communities along the highway, deeply dependent on American travelers for their livelihoods, faced sudden and severe economic hardship almost overnight. Motels, diners, and gas stations in places like Watson Lake and Fort Nelson rely on this seasonal traffic for survival. Without the steady stream of visitors, many businesses struggled to keep their doors open. The closure, while aimed at protecting public health, created a new crisis for these remote regions, one of economic uncertainty, social isolation, and an uncertain future. Ultimately, it exposed the deep, interwoven nature of the U.S.-Canada relationship, and how quickly it can unravel when a single road is closed, reminding us just how much we depend on each other across this vast northern frontier. President Trump's response was immediate and combative, leaving little room for ambiguity about his stance. Within hours of the announcement, he took to the podium, his tone sharp and unwavering, determined to project strength both to the American public and to international observers. He denounced Canada's move as a betrayal by a top ally, calling it an unexpected and deeply disappointing decision. Trump vowed swift action to reopen the route, insisting that the United States would not tolerate what he described as an unjustified disruption to a critical economic lifeline. The White House signaled possible retaliation, with Trump declaring that all options were on the table, from economic measures to diplomatic pressure. His administration made it clear that they were prepared to escalate if necessary. High-level diplomatic talks began almost immediately, but Washington's tone was one of demand, not negotiation. U.S. officials pressed for a reversal, emphasizing the importance of the route for both countries' economies. Trump's America First stance reframed the closure as an affront requiring a show of strength. He rallied his base, framing the dispute as a test of American resolve and leadership on the world stage. This marked a sharp break from the usual cordial U.S.-Canada relations, turning what began as a health issue into a high-stakes test of wills between two close neighbors. The sense of partnership was quickly replaced by suspicion and rivalry. Behind the scenes, U.S. agencies scrambled to draft countermeasures, including economic pressure and potential restrictions on Canadian goods. The urgency was palpable as officials worked late into the night. The administration's goal was clear: make the cost of closure too high for Canada to maintain. Economic advisors calculated the potential fallout, weighing tariffs and other punitive steps. The conflict quickly became a symbol of Trump's transactional foreign policy, where alliances were measured by immediate benefit, and loyalty was expected in return for partnership. The world's largest bilateral trade relationship now hung in the balance, with businesses and workers on both sides anxiously awaiting the outcome of this unprecedented standoff. Alaska's economy was hit hard. Its main supply route was gone, forcing businesses to rely on costly air and sea freight. Shortages and price hikes loomed, straining an already isolated state. On the Canadian side, border towns lost their primary revenue source overnight. Gas stations, motels, and restaurants faced layoffs and possible closure. The closure was popular in southern Canada, but northern communities demanded aid and policy changes. The dispute threatened the $700 billion U.S.-Canada trade relationship, with talk of tariffs sending shockwaves through both economies. A single highway closure revealed just how deeply the two nations' fortunes are intertwined. Canada justified the closure as a public health necessity, citing repeated violations by American travelers who strayed from the direct route. Officials argued that enforcing quarantine rules along the vast highway was impossible, and previous attempts at fines had failed. The move was widely supported by Canadians, especially given fears for vulnerable northern and Indigenous communities. Canada framed the decision as protecting its most at-risk citizens, not as a political statement. The clash exposed a fundamental difference: Canada's collective safety-first approach versus America's focus on individual freedom and economic access. The Trump administration quickly escalated from words to threats, considering tariffs on Canadian goods like aluminum and lumber. U.S. officials also floated the idea of slowing commercial traffic at key border crossings, threatening supply chains vital to both economies. Canadian industry groups warned that a trade war would be devastating, while American businesses feared collateral damage. The dispute over a single highway now threatened to unravel the world's most extensive bilateral trading relationship. Canada was caught between U.S. pressure and strong domestic support for its health measures. Behind the scenes, urgency grew to find a diplomatic off-ramp. The standoff became a high-stakes test of wills, with both sides risking lasting economic and political damage. The risk of miscalculation was real, and the consequences could be severe. The Alaska Highway dispute threatened to permanently damage the trust at the heart of U.S.-Canada relations. The closure eroded the image of the world's longest undefended border, revealing deep differences in national priorities. Canada's focus on collective safety clashed with America's emphasis on liberty and economic access. The crisis exposed the need for better communication and crisis management between the two allies. Whether this was a one-off or a sign of a more transactional future, the alliance would never be quite the same. With the highway closed, Americans scrambled for alternatives. The Alaska Marine Highway ferry system was quickly overwhelmed, expensive, slow, and unable to handle the surge. Air travel spiked, but flying cargo and people was costly and impractical for many. The U.S. and Alaska worked to expand ferry and flight options, but gaps remained. As pressure mounted, talks shifted toward compromise. Negotiators proposed a secure transit corridor. Pre-screened Americans could drive through Canada on a tightly controlled route with permits and GPS tracking. This aimed to balance Canada's health concerns with America's need for access. The search for alternatives underscored the irreplaceable role of the Alaska Highway. Ultimately, both sides realized that reopening the route was the only sustainable solution. The crisis forced a return to the negotiating table and a renewed focus on cooperation. The 2025 Alaska Highway closure became a defining test of U.S.-Canada cooperation. Canada's health-driven decision clashed with America's demand for access, sparking a diplomatic and economic crisis. Costly alternatives proved inadequate, pushing both nations toward compromise. The episode exposed the deep interdependence and fragility of the relationship. It left lasting scars, highlighting the need for better crisis management and communication. Rebuilding trust will require deliberate effort and renewed commitment to partnership. The question remains, can allies balance sovereignty with the collaboration needed to face future challenges together?